Hi everyone. The last video covered the box model in CSS, and this video is going to cover how to move items around on the page. In conjunction with margins and padding, the properties that I'll be discussing in this video will work to create the page layouts that you're looking for. So there's three positioning properties in addition to margin and padding, which aren't true positioning properties. There's float, clear, and position. And I'll take these kind of one by one and go through them. So let's start with float. Float allows you to tell the browser to take any given box and move it either to the left edge or to the right edge and wrap content around it. It will remove the box from the normal document flow, meaning that if you float something, content is going to try to push up near its space because of the way the normal document flow works. So floating will take a box, pull it out, push it all the way to the left or all the way to the right. If there's another floated box, it will push it up to the side of that floated box, but otherwise it will push it to the edge of the containing element. So let's take an example here, and let's say that I add in another H2. And you see that as a subheader. I am going to specify a float on that H2, and you can float left or right. In this case, I am going to float left. And you see that the remaining content will kind of pull down around it. And that's because this is said, push it all the way over to the left and then wrap remaining content around that. It removes it from the normal document flow, which is why this moves back up into this space, because the normal document flow says learn CSS positioning, which is an H1, and then the ordered list, because the H2 is not a part of the normal document flow anymore. If I change that to float right, you'll see that the same thing happened, although in this case, there's no wrap on this because this is floated all the way to the right. Floating works to wrap content around a block, such as, say, an image that you want multiple paragraphs worth of text to wrap around. However, it's also really useful for creating columns. So I'm going to erase this subheader, and I'm going to create a couple of divs. And these divs are going to currently be empty, but I am going to style them by giving them a height of 100 pixels, a background color of light blue, and I'm going to give them a margin of 1% so that you can see these two individual blocks. So these are my two blocks right here, but if I float them, then I can turn them into columns. So what I can do here is I can do float left, but my problem too is I don't have a width. So I'm going to do a width of 40%. And you see that I have two columns here, a 40% div and another 40% div. The second one is also floated, but it pushes into this space right here, and it recognizes another floated item and pushes up against it rather than trying to push all the way to the left of the page edge. You see, though, that I've created some problems by doing this. So I've created these columns right here, but this stuff right here is pushing into the space occupied to the right of that column because that column is floated. And that's because when things are removed from the document flow, content wants to pull up into the space of the content that was removed from the document flow. As such, there's a property called clearing, and clearing is how you fix issues with floats like this right here. So I can apply a clear to my ordered lists of both, and that will say to the browser, ensure that there is no content on either side of this particular selector. So on my OLs, there's no content on either side with a clear both. You can also set clear left and clear right. Clear right, you notice, will do nothing here because there's not content to the right of that OL, there's content to the left of that OL. So clear left and clear both will both accomplish the same thing, which is ensure there is nothing to the left or both sides of that particular block. This is done commonly with footers, but it's also a really common thing that you want to do whenever you're floating columns or other kinds of content. You want to make sure that you clear appropriately to ensure that the content doesn't push into the space that you don't want it to occupy. Together with margin and padding, floating and clearing is going to handle the vast majority of the layout work for your document. However, there is one additional positioning property, and that's simply position. This is something that you do not want to use very often, but there are some contexts in which it's really important to know. So the position property is specified in this way, and in addition to the position, you need to select a type of positioning. So you need one of three types: relative, absolute, or fixed. And relative positioning is going to position the item relative to its containing element, and it does not remove the item from the document flow. As such, relative is not very frequently used, although there are some very niche contexts in which it's useful. The more commonly used ones are absolute and fixed, and you see that that changes my layout pretty significantly. So absolute and fixed operate basically the same way, with the exception that absolute content will scroll and fixed content will not scroll when the user scrolls. So absolute and fixed are relative to the document window. And with all positioning properties, all absolute, relative, and fixed positioning, you can set values with properties of top, bottom, left, and right. So I can say top 50 pixels, left 50 pixels, and that will position that content from the top and left edges of the document window 50 pixels. Absolute, again, will stay at that location, but when the user scrolls, it will scroll with them. Fixed will stay there no matter what. So fixed is something you would use if, for instance, you wanted a navigation menu at the top of the page that sticks there and doesn't scroll when the user scrolls. You would use fixed positioning to accomplish that. Sometimes when you do your layout, you'll have items that end up overlapping with each other, as you see with this content right here and the divs that I created to show you columns. In those cases, you can use the z-index property. And the z-index property will control where in the stacking order overlapping elements reside. And you can do any integer value, including negatives here. So if I do -1, you'll see that my content goes behind the columns there, because the columns by default have a regular z-index of approximately 1. And so when you do -1, they go behind that content. Finally, you can control the display of items through the display property. And if you set a display of none, that will make those items disappear. You can also handle how content that spills beyond the bounds of that particular box is handled with overflow. The default is overflow auto, but you can also do overflow hidden and overflow scroll, which will scroll any box with enough content. This is only really important if you have a height on your content, such as I have right here. That covers positioning and basic layout with CSS. I would like to reiterate that position as a property should be infrequently used. If you want to bump content around, you should be using margins for the most part. Floating and clearing is used for big global layout, such as various columns and column sizes. Thanks for watching.